All right, let's talk about ratios and proportions. Now, I know, if those words give you some serious flashbacks to middle school math class, just hang on. We're going to strip away all that boring jargon and show you a super practical tool that, believe it or not, you're using every single day.
So let's kick things off with a little riddle. What could a simple glass of juice and, say, a dose of medicine possibly have in common? I mean, they seem totally different, right? But the connection, it's all about the hidden math that makes sure both are mixed just right. And today, we're going to unpack exactly how that works.
Okay, so to get to that answer, we've got to start with the absolute basics, the fundamental building block of this whole thing. So let's just ask, what is a ratio anyway?
It's actually super simple. A ratio is just a way to compare two things. That's it. And we do this all the time without even thinking about it, Like comparing how many hours you work to how many you have off, or the number of eggs you have left to what the recipe calls for. A ratio just gives us a nice, clean, mathematical way to write that comparison down.
And this brings us right back to that glass of juice. Think about it. When you're mixing frozen concentrate, the instructions say something like 1 can of concentrate to 3 cans of water. Well, guess what? That's a ratio. It's that exact relationship that makes sure your juice isn't too watery or too strong. It's perfect every time.
Okay, so we get the idea of what a ratio is, but how do you, actually write one down so you can work with it? Let's take a look at the rules for putting these things on paper. It's pretty straightforward.
So there are basically 3 common ways you'll see a ratio written, and they all mean the exact same thing. Let's say we're talking about a clinic with 3 nurses for every 4 medical assistants. You could write it with a colon, you could write it out in words, or you can write it as a fraction. They're all totally interchangeable. But pay special attention to that fraction format. It's going to be super important in just a minute.
All right, before we move on, there is one huge rule you absolutely cannot forget. Order is everything. The order really, really matters. A ratio of 3 nurses to 4 assistants is a totally different situation than 4 nurses to 3 assistants, right? The order tells the story, so you've got to keep the numbers in the same sequence they appear in the problem. Another thing we do with ratios is simplify them, kind of like you do with fractions, just to make them easier to understand. So take this example. You get 8 hours of sleep in a 24-hour day. We write that as a fraction, 8 over 24. Now, what's the biggest number that goes into both 8 and 24? It's 8, right? So we divide the top and the bottom by 8, and we get 1 over 3. See? It's much clearer to say you sleep for 1 out of every 3 hours than 8 out of 24, even though it's the exact same amount of time. All right, so we've got a pretty good handle on ratios. Now let's take this to the next level and see how it builds into an even more powerful idea, proportions.
So what's a proportion? It's just a statement that says 2 ratios are equal. That's literally all it is. You're basically setting up an equation with one ratio on one side and another on the other to show they have the same relationship. And this is where the magic happens. This is how we go from just comparing stuff to actually solving problems.
Let's go back to that clinic example. Imagine a small clinic has that 3 to 4 ratio of nurses to assistants. But what about a huge hospital? Maybe it has 15 nurses and 20 assistants. A proportion helps us ask the question, is the staffing balance, the ratio, the same in both places, even though the actual numbers are way bigger? And that's the big question, right? How can we be sure? I mean, just looking at 3 over 4 and 15 over 20, it's not super obvious if they're equal. So how do we prove it? Well, lucky for us, there's a really simple trick. It's called cross multiplication. All you do is multiply the numbers diagonally across the equal sign. So you take 3 times 20, that's 60. Then you do the other diagonal, 4 times 15, which is also 60. And because those two numbers match, boom, we just proved it's a true proportion. The staffing balance is exactly the same. Okay, so now we know what proportions are and how to check if they're real, but where does this stuff actually matter? Like, in the real world? Well, it turns out it is absolutely everywhere, from your kitchen to the highway. Seriously, proportions are the secret weapon behind so many things we do. Ever had to double a recipe for a party or cut it in half? You're using proportions to scale all the ingredients up or down. Or, when you're looking at a map and it says 1 inch equals 10 miles, if you want to figure out how far 5 inches on that map is in real life, that's a proportion. It's an incredibly useful practical tool. But okay, let's pivot for a second. Because while it's cool that this helps with cooking and maps, this math takes on a whole new level of importance in a field like healthcare. We're talking about a place where getting the numbers right can literally be a matter of life and death. And this quote really says it all. This isn't just some nifty little math trick. In medicine, proportions are called powerful tools. They are absolutely fundamental to keeping patients safe and making sure treatments actually work.
And this brings us right back to the second half of our opening question, the dose of medicine. It relies on the exact same math as that glass of juice, but the stakes, they're infinitely higher. Think about it. Pharmacists, nurses, doctors, they are constantly using proportions to figure out the exact right dose of a drug, maybe based on a patient's weight. And in that situation, being accurate isn't just a good idea, it is an absolute, non-negotiable requirement.
So, you see, ratios and proportions, they're not just some dusty concept from a math textbook. They're like a special pair of glasses for seeing all the hidden connections and relationships around us. So I'll leave you with a thought. From how you manage your money to how you plan your day, what are the important ratios that are secretly shaping your life? Because once you start looking for them, I promise you'll start seeing them everywhere.